So in addition to the Election Integrity Commission, I know you wrote recently about the census. We're about to take a census in a couple years, 2020, and this is a major deal for determining representation in Congress or in the House of Representatives for formulas involving resources and so on and so forth. And you are trying to, from what I can see, sound the alarm about how the census is going, how the preparations for the census are inadequate at this point. And you wrote a really interesting piece about the man President Trump has chosen to head up efforts for the census, arguing that he is kind of another figure in this world of voter suppression and gerrymandering and so on and so forth. So we have a little time left. Could you talk a little bit about that, about the census and this guy?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm extremely concerned that the Trump administration is using the census, which is constitutionally mandated to accurately count every person in America, as a vehicle for their war on voting, which is just an unbelievable misuse of a constitutionally mandated task. And if you look at the guy that they are close to appointing, he has not yet been appointed, but everyone says he's going to be appointed. They are choosing a guy by the name of Thomas Brunel, who's a professor of political science at the University of Texas at Dallas, to be the deputy director of the Census Bureau and basically the de facto head of the 2020 census. And the census is usually run by nonpartisan people, career people that have a long history working in government. But this guy, Thomas Brunel, has no history working in government. And even more disturbingly, he is an expert in Republican gerrymandering, meaning he has been hired by Republicans to defend gerrymandered maps in more than a dozen states, including states like North Carolina and Alabama and Virginia, where those maps were struck down by federal courts as racial gerrymandering. And this is so disturbing to me because the census forms the basis for redistricting. So you need an accurate census so you can have an accurate apportionment of seats. But here you have a guy that's an expert at manipulating the census and an expert at manipulating the drawing of districts to favor Republicans, which is such a conflict of interest in terms of how the census is supposed to work. He's also someone who has written a book arguing that competitive elections are bad for America, which is quite a controversial opinion.
That's an extremely controversial opinion.
An extremely controversial opinion, especially because what he's doing in all of these redistricting cases is basically arguing that Republicans should draw as many safe seats as possible for themselves and as few safe seats as possible for Democrats to maximize Republican representation. But this guy is supposed to be in charge of a task of accurately counting every American. This is something that's supposed to be addressed from a scientific, apolitical perspective. And now they're basically trying to bring in one of their lead gerrymandering experts in the Republican Party to run the census, which is just an unbelievable and dramatic departure from how any previous administration ran the census. You had Republican administrations, Democratic administrations. Yeah, they had slightly different people in there, but they both were committed to an accurate and nonpartisan census, and I don't see that happening at all. You also had the fact that the Department of Justice has written to the Census Bureau and asked them to add a question on citizenship. So right now the census doesn't ask if you're a U.S. citizen or not, because they're supposed to count everyone in America, citizens or not. The Justice Department wants to ask if people are citizens, which in this climate where so many people are afraid of being deported, that could be a disaster. That could massively depress immigrant responses, which would mean two things. Number one, there are fewer immigrant responses, so areas with a lot of immigrants, like New York and California, get fewer resources. The second thing they could do is they could say, well, if we have that data on citizenship, we can draw districts just based on citizens, not based on total population, which Republicans tried to do last year, lost a huge Supreme Court case about this in 2016, but now they're trying again. So I think this is a very, very, very devious way to try to undermine democracy. And I think they're using the census as one of their vehicles for undermining democracies, which I find to be very disturbing. I think we have to sound the alarm now because the census is going to begin on April 2020, but the preparations are starting now to do it. And if they get it wrong right now, there's no way they'll be able to do it accurately when it actually begins in April 2020.
And more broadly, what you seem to be describing is even if this Election Integrity Commission is gone, even if Kobach has a somewhat less visible role in the administration, it is the case that voter suppression efforts of reducing the representation of Democratic voting constituencies are kind of ongoing in this administration.
Yes, I think that's absolutely the case. I think even if there was no more election integrity commission, even if Donald Trump suddenly stopped claiming that millions of people voted illegally, we would still see Republican efforts at the state level to make it harder to vote. We would still see the Trump administration trying to sabotage the census and other things that promote democracy. We would still see the Trump Justice Department be hostile to voting rights. So this fight over voter suppression is far from over.